Thank you for the eloquent introduction. All right. Can we get the lights? Let's figure out what I'm going to present. I came early to LA to write a lecture, and I sat down and started writing an office policy. I'm not going to go through it all for you, but I'm going to maybe read the beginning and then skip to an appendix 0 at the end, and then show some work. It's going to be kind of a little bit all over the place. This is something we're going to do. We're actually doing in the office right now is to write an office policy. We're a relatively young office still, and we've probably only been around for really having an actual office for maybe with employees for a couple of years. And we realize from talking to other friends who have offices, they say you need an office policy so people don't steal everything. And so we've decided we're going to start we should do this. So, dear employee or other interested parties, policies are put in place to serve you, the employee, hereafter called you and our firm. See Appendix 11, how to read the policy. MOS, hereafter called the office, is growing and changing architecture firm that wishes to construct a progressive architectural avant-garde. This avant-garde has its own desires too. It wishes to exist after and in a funny way, perhaps because of both of the previous opportunistic practice generation of architects and the exhaustion of the digital rococo. See Appendix 5.1, 7 Habits of Highly Annoying Digital Rococo People, HADRP. Appendix 2.8, How to Talk to Members of the Practice Generation PG in the Flowchart 90s versus the naughties, which I will actually show. While we cannot have an office policy hereafter called the policy that covers every possibility, eventuality, or human need, we do have leadership hereafter called the principles that will listen and endeavor to make appropriate decisions that are fair to you and the office and make any adjustments to the policy that may be required. Therefore, this policy is not a contract and is not binding. It is merely a set of guidelines that may be altered at any time without notice. More than anything, the policy expresses the right and obligations of the principals to interpret and modify the policy when individuals or the office's well-being are at stake, which is, to be honest, happens all the time. So we try to be, it's actually pretty elaborate, so, but to go through it all will be painful for all of us. And I want to skip to the end. This is so this is, and it's not, this is what we call the GOP, Appendix 0, General Office Protocol, and it actually is serious. So we think of this as actually serious. So this is our definition for working for architecture. Medium, technical support plus convention, artistic genre, typology, history plus play equals architecture. Medium, these are sort of the definitions in the appendix that we have for the policy, so everyone's on the same page. Medium is how we conceptualize and work through a project, i.e. form, function, material, program, context, etc. Convention is how we situate and evaluate the work within the discipline. Play is something else. Difficult to talk about, actually. This, of course, remains vague, as do most formulas. Seen through the filter of architectural history, it becomes clear that these variables persist in constant turmoil. Each generation's task is tasked to rewrite them, the importance of each dependent upon desired emphasis or outcome. While convention offers some protections against the anxieties generated by change, medium continually produces new enthusiasms and frictions, which instigate and exacerbate the improvisations of play. Medium specificity, as championed by Clement Greenberg, was the search for objective authenticity through material medium, a discourse of modern art. I'm sorry, Sylvia, I'm making you sit through this. In architecture, authenticity through medium is, by contrast, inherently problematic. Rarely do we construct our work, but rather represent it in a mediated form, because architecture inevitably operates removed from its subject matter, previous disciplinary models have presented a false choice whether to locate architectural meaning within a post-humanist conceptual project of representation, i.e., or a humanist project of situated materiality and life. History gets lumped into there too, usually, as if one could hope to be either intelligent or sensitive, but not both. And given our current disciplinary condition, which I think is actually a really interesting time right now in the academy because it's pretty much in shambles, the ad hoc fragmentary methodologies of analysis and evaluation, perhaps the most reasonable position to take, and I think this has been the one of recent years, is that the medium of architecture is a material construction within specificities of its social context. But if we limit ourselves to the real, we discount an entire discursive history of unbuilt and unbuildable works at risk operating only within a technical and social scientific discourse where function, economy, performance trump meaning or cultural value. And value through this greatest good. So then I break down, I'm going to try to jump to the projects at one point, but break it down into sort of these categories of art and life as a kind of, I think it's a hardcore split that we still are faced with, strangely enough. And I made part of this is a chart, one, the kind of 90s versus the naughties. And even if you look at, if you think of this is something Hilary and I did kind of relatively quickly, honestly. We could probably keep going and we probably should edit some of this too. But if you try to think of architecture from the 1990 to 2000 and from 2000 to, which is the 90s, and the naughties of 2000 to 2010, you kind of get a picture of what the profession was like and the kind of the problem that we're faced with. In the 90s, it's representation, the end of history, process-driven methodologies to avoid postmodern semiotics. Internal, it's disciplinary, it's avant-garde, it's theoretical, critical, it's geometry. It's avoiding reference through sort of inscrutability and transformation. It's formal systems. It's not materiality. It's sort of softwares. Let's say the software packages that people talked about were 3D modeling, iterative. It was lots of complexity. It was the art project as opposed to the life project. It was fictions. It was elitist. This next one's kind of interesting that we were trying to think about was never the interest to be professional or to be licensed by architects, I think, at that moment, and you wanted to be published in assemblage, any, and progressive architecture. If you look at the other side, the naughties, it's really realism. It's the end of representation. It's about built work because, in a way, I think the difficulty of judging, in a way, architecture became so difficult to evaluate in the 90s through a kind of the critical project, in a sense, that people could really understand and value built work. It was just like if it got built, then it was kind of a matter of fact, and that made it good. It was external. It was opportunistic, my least favorite word, probably. Rear guard, as opposed to avant-garde. It was practical. It was physics, structure, things like this. So it was BIM. Anyways, it was life. I mean, program. In a way, the diagrams instead of plans, photorealism, construction documents. You want to be published in Dwell and Blog. So we are faced with two dead ends presented to ourselves right now at this moment. We have a dead end of kind of formalism, which I think has become both tautological and expressionistic simultaneously through computation. I mean, process-driven scripting, producing gestural work, which is kind of the ultimate dream and also nightmare. And on the other side, we have the old, it's an old problem in a certain sense of functionalism as another kind of positivist outcome, where it turns into a pseudoscience, either a pseudo-social science or a pseudo-science science of. So, and in both cases, let's say the cultural project of architecture, which is what we want to maintain, is killed. So, what do you do in this paralysis? This is really the problem that we're all faced with, and I don't know if we necessarily give you the answers, but it's the context that we're thinking we're in. All right. So I did make this at one point. It was going to be this whole thing on the physics and geometry at one point, and then I started getting into the office policy. But I was going to show, in a way, a kind of series of projects that we've done that I think we're interested in both dead ends simultaneously, let's say, of the formalist and the functionalist positivisms, and how we can use them both to find some other way forward. So physics versus geometry, this is a series of projects we did, and I'm just going to show, this is a bracket of our practice, a very specific bracket that we're looking at through sort of software things that we've done, and then how it leads into projects. We simultaneously work in the office producing software. A lot of times I'll show the software and how it works along with the project. So the first, has a nice fade. One of the early projects that we did was, it was called Fortress of Solitude. It was a kind of based off of soda play. I don't know if that means anything to you guys, but spring modeling software. Worked with Simon Greenwald. Everything we do, by the way, is in processing also. I wish Casey was here so I could show him all the stuff. But these are early studies that we did with like kind of self-generating trusses and spring models. So using the software to sort of grow structure. I don't have the software anymore, and it's so old that it probably wouldn't work on this computer anyways. But kind of going to go through these things kind of quickly. The sizes of the pieces would change according to the load that they were taking. This is again 2004, 2005, there. And then we got an opportunity to build something in the Whitney for the Bucky Fuller, and we started to use some of the software. So it's hard to photograph this thing. The next one is called, and I can show some of the software too. This is called, we call it MoS Cat. It's based on catenary systems and things like this. I would say also when we started working with this, we started thinking about color, sort of using the kind of scientific spectrum in the totally wrong way. So it doesn't code anything, but it produces this effect, let's say, that of color that we were interested in polychromatic as a kind of the polychromatic in a way as a kind of monochromatic, if that makes sense. Also within the software, it does things like flattens everything and numbers it so you can make models. The models also, we typically make movies. This one's called The Zombies Are Late, and it's about a group of zombies that time travel into the future only to arrive off course and at night, and they can't see the kind of gleaming, sustainable, utopian, cosmopolitan city that they were trying to get to. And they talk about waiting, what it would be like, trying to imagine what it will be like when they actually do see it. This also leads to things like PS1, frankly, which is all based on a kind of trajectory of this work. Glenn Lowry kept saying to trim the bangs, by the way. I thought was interesting. So I can show some of that stuff too. Just to give you a sense of what this is, what it's like. Sometimes there's, oh God, don't tell me there's going to be a technical problem. Okay. So, you know, a lot of these things, this also is a few years old, so let me. Et cetera, et cetera. And with this, we can start to produce surfaces through a very simple set of rules. So you can change these things and triangulate them in different ways, et cetera. And then start to give the surfaces themselves a kind of physics, so fabric quality. And let me there's tabs and stuff you can put on them. And anyways, it's sort of endless. And then it will flatten it all and turn it into pieces that you can start to use. So to make models and things like this. The next set of projects we're looking at. We were looking at software that was based on the equilibrium of stacking objects so that they were on the verge of collapse. So that if you moved any object, that it would be in ruins. And at the same time, we did it in reverse. So at what point can you remove as much of it as a kind of block as pieces of blocks until if you move one more, the whole thing will fall apart. These are some of these from the software. Jenga. It's like Jenga. It is like Jenga. That's Jenga. And we even made Jenga-like models. This is when I think we really got into bad Photoshop. We were just really excited about bad Photoshop. Really, we were like, how bad can you make it? These are some of the bigger models. This is also done with Tobias, who's an artist, Tobias Putri. It's really interesting. He does all these educational components too with these things. And so we were doing the software, and I met Tobias somewhere, I think at a Bucky Fuller symposium actually, with Michael organized. Anyways, and we've been doing a bunch of projects with him since. And he has this whole thing, I wish I had more pictures of it, where he has like an education program teaching, basically it's for people just to play Jenga all day long. So this is another series of projects for the Boymans Museum. That was at the Baltic in Gateshead in England. It's at the Boymans Museum. This is that MIT list. This is one I was talking about, which was in sort of what we called MOS erosion or something. And it's about how far could you remove pieces until it would fall apart. And this is a kind of recent project I'm not going to show too much of, but it's a kind of an extension of this that we've been working on in Uganda for a community center. It's a pretty weird, interesting client. They're a kind of nonprofit group who is interested in, I mean, they like this, which is strange. You would think that they would want a kind of Teddy Cruz special or something, but they're very interested in actually trying to experiment in a way and try to find new. In Uganda, it's a particularly interesting situation where the North and South have been at war for so long that they want to find forms that don't have obvious political symbols to them, that can that they can come together on, to sort of produce new cultural iconography. And we've been working with them, this Uganda group. They're Canadian and also British, of sort of exiles from Uganda on this kind of project, and also we're working with AKT and Hanif Kara, who's also was born in Uganda. I didn't know that, but until we started working on it. But so it's really an interesting project. These are very early studies. You'll see that there's no door, for instance. So I mean, these are kind of very beginning studies that we were looking at with it. And I can show some of the software stuff as well. I don't know if showing the software stuff, we've never shown it ever before, really, I don't think. So it's kind of just fun. So I don't know if it's not fun for you guys, just let me know. But this, you said you have a set of properties for how the kind of size of blocks and the kind of offset and the probability, you can make it so it will rotate. Physics is not on right now, which makes it good. And you can just watch things. Jenga. You can watch them fall, which is kind of exciting. From our perspective, I mean, there's sort of a pleasure of watching these things fall apart that ate up weeks in the office. This is similar to that. These are looking at sand, where we're looking at how to think of a project in a way as kind of sand. And to be honest, a lot of these things too, we are thinking of our friends and what other people are doing at the moment in a way, and thinking about the discipline. So for this, I would say, I don't know how they would feel about this, but like Ben Aranda, Randa Lash Grotto project, in a way, is so influential in the academy, and I really think that they're incredibly actually important in a certain level in the schools at the moment. That we were trying to think, how could you do it completely wrong? And it's kind of a way that we also work in general in the office, is to try to think, how do you do things wrong? And so we're looking at kind of like the most dumb geometries instead of smart geometries, and then trying to find ways to produce forms with these cubes based on if they're like sand. So thinking about like Frei Otto did these great experiments in the 70s with sand, of just filling up like sand to make purely compressive structures and then putting holes in the bottom of these big tubs of sand to both make structures that are heaps and angles of repose, and also to make compressive vaults. And this is what our in a way we were thinking about at some level, but with these cubes. And I would say also what we're thinking about too in the geometry versus physics is to, let's say in 60s art production, we were very interested in, if you look at like Eisenmann's notes on conceptual architecture, which Michael was talking about this a second earlier, is The heroes in it are like LeWitt and Judd, and I feel like that produced a kind of trajectory of the discipline. And I was trying to think, what if we took those and we put Smithson in there and early Sarah? Where would we have gone? And I think it would have been totally different. And I think what you would do is, like Smithson, you know, the kind of heaps and piles and the kind of physicality of these things, and also early Sarah, just like throwing lead and things like this to produce other possibilities for architectural form. So you can show some of the software. I'm just going to fill it up for a little bit here. Yeah. Okay, let me put it over to one side. And then, you know, once you fill it up more, you can, if the particles are smaller, it actually works better. It's kind of wiggling right now. Is to produce these kind of structures that are kind of vault, vault structures or other things. And you can also add, we have other things you can produce in here to sort of pour the particles over topographies and other objects to produce domes and things like this. That's how these are made through filling up a kind of cylinder, and then these are like kind of upside down in a way, or to produce these vaults where you then add holes and the parts fly out of the holes to produce a kind of form, a vaulted form. And these haven't led to any projects yet. I don't know where they would go, but hopefully there's a way to find projects. This is a similar thing where we're looking at nets and rigid and soft bodies together to hang these structures to produce forms. This we're building this summer for Vice magazine for some reason. They contacted us and they wanted to do a pavilion. Different output things you can do and stuff like ISO meshes. I'm doing this. These are kind of really crude, but they'll give you a kind of sense of how things work. You can pick other nets, etc. Change the density of it. Keep it planar, allow rotation. Add weight. Trying to think what else. Anyway, so that gives a sense of kind of some of the, you can go in and control the springs, you can control kind of gravity again, things like this, kind of the scenarios for the loading. If you want to apply lateral loads to it, it's possible. To test it sort of structural, and it's a way to sort of play within something that seems, it's a way to play within something that is probably the realm of engineers, sort of real-time physics. We're using a lot of stuff that's been developed for the video game industry. To sort of do the kind of real-time collisions and things like this, particle collisions. I think that's it. I mean, the last thing I was going to do is maybe show a movie, and this was not, it's not our movie. It's a movie from PS1 that was done by an artist that I think we just love so much. And in a way, it was kind of exciting to, I think what excites us most when we do a project, and it's only happened a couple times and recently, is when someone else takes you as material for something they do. So it's sort of a sign of success for us. If I can get this thing to play. Oh. Is this going to work? Yeah, I have no idea what that means even. But the I thought it was. I couldn't. It was really troubling at first, but I've come to enjoy it. I think. Just to go back, I think, and I'm going to end shortly. I think the things that are going on right now at the end of, let's say, after the 90s and the naughties, or this kind of double bind that we find ourselves in at the moment, is that I think the architects. I think this is something that a lot of architects are already working on in a way, is to find new ways of working that can frustrate both categories, both formalism and functionalism, or the life, let's say not even like the life category and the art category. And for us, I think that is probably the way to move forward. I was explaining to, I thought, the dean, or the chair, Abe, about the kind of model is a kind of Haruki Murakami model, where it's neither realism nor fantasy, but something else in between. Peter. And I think that's probably what we're going to have to. I think that's probably a way, at least for us at this moment, it's a way to move forward. So, thanks. Sure. Questions? Who could have questions after that?
Questions? Wow. Comments?
Sure.
It was super funny. Thank you. I don't know. I was wondering how Jason felt to end on such a hairy scene.
I don't know if our hairs are the same.
No, they're for sure not the same. No. I mean, Jason and I've had long conversations about the difference between hair and fur, but I mean, I never really thought it would become such a big deal, but there it is. No, here's my maybe my observation. I don't know what it's worth. I was a little worried at the beginning when you were setting up the two categories, and just it's such a trap. Like, how do you set up two categories and not either fall for one or the other, and nor end on the super postmodern model of frustrating both. And I guess I decided that by the end, the model was kind of that of a magician, which was that the category of opposition was really to distract me from the performance itself. And it started to make me think of the movies that I'm sure you've seen of, like, Le Corbusier lecturing, talking about something that nobody pays any attention to anymore, and everybody's actually watching him draw. So it's a new kind of, the lecture itself is a new kind of performance. And it made me want to go back and think through all of the things that you presented and the things that you didn't mention. So, for example, in your first software thing, you talked about the catenary arch, but you didn't actually talk about why you designed the software so that when the arch popped up, it did like a jiggle, for example, or the bounce or the color and so forth. Anyway, it's not really a question, but I enjoyed the sleight of hand and the kind of promise that you were going to tell me the tricks. I guess that's what it means to show me the software, is you're going to show me the tricks. But in fact, it worked very well to distract me from what the tricks really were, and I'm very glad that they stayed secret.
Well, I like the hair. To answer Sylvia's question, I love the hair. I mean, in my world, all architecture has hair on it. So that's so different from my understanding of a hairy architecture that I think it's fantastic. But I wanted to add, I have a comment about the title of the lecture that you used to frame then the work, the geometry versus physics. There would have been an alternate title, clearly, that would be the both and version of it, right? Geometry and and physics, and clearly you didn't come to the title or that way of framing the work this weekend. I'm sure you came to that crossroad a long time ago. And I feel like I'm kind of familiar with it too, but that maybe some other people took the different route. So tonight when you gave us that title, and I was thinking, okay, so what's the use value of that? And I saw two things. One, you said explicitly, like kind of maybe alternative versions of form, or I don't remember your exact statement, but that would be one place where where you'd get something out of pitting geometry against physics, rather than somehow unifying them. And the other, I think, is implicit in the work is more the representational stuff, which is so, frankly, and I mean this with all respect, because you know how sympathetic I am a fan, but some of the representation is so ugly, right? And I think intentionally so, and sometimes the ugliness kind of rises to the level of being so cool, which seemed to be another kind of traction you get out of like not unifying physics with the geometry project. But I'm wondering, tacky. Do you ever imagine if you had taken your practice in that other direction, where the argument has to be about somehow extending the geometry problem through this problem of physics? What would the work look like?
No, I mean, I don't think we're giving up on the geometry. I set it up in a way as a kind of provocation, not to say that it's in a way, Sylvia said it better than I did, in a way not to set up the kind of, to pick a side, but as a kind of condition or something that is kind of, I think is actually, you do hear it in a sort of disciplinary talk. Like it was, the discipline maybe 20 years ago would have nothing to do with, like physics was on the other side of that spectrum. And I'm very familiar and educated in the geometry side of it. It probably comes to me naturally. And I think, Jason, if there's anybody in the room, we're probably the most sympathetic to each other in a certain way of thinking about this at this moment, and trying to figure out a way after you said it great when you came to my class in the fall. You said after a million lines, a million plus didn't really make any sense, or something like this. It just, you couldn't go any further with it. You had to find some other way. And for you, that was the hair. And for us, we were thinking of other just models, like really simple, like we tend to do like simple things like this, and like try to get things, like again, this idea of trying to get things wrong is like rereading notes on conceptual architecture, going back to these kind of the beginning points, and then changing the illustrations. And that automatically produces something else. Like if you can get rid of, I actually think Rauschenberg is incredibly important to him. For instance, he doesn't talk all about him, but like the early stuff. And that produces, let's say, an alternate universe in which you can forget about. In a way, they're always still lurking there, maybe, and that you could say you're only making them more present and stuff like this, that kind of history. But for us, it's to sort of take it and produce an alternate universe in a way, which is not necessarily totally outside of that narrative, but it's a sort of fiction or fantasy narrative that exists parallel or out on the one side of it. Does that make sense? I don't know. I might be crazy. So, yeah.
Hi, Michael.
Yeah.
I was just thinking about, remember What If comics?
Yeah.
Where you always had the sort of narrative reversed, so the origins were switched. And I was thinking about that. I mean, the sort of swapping out of Sarah and Smithson for Lewitt and Judd is really, it's interesting and intriguing, but if you look at sentences on contemporary art or conceptual art, 68, he says something like, irrational thoughts must be sort of worked out absolutely and rationally. Would that narrative then reverse that, so that rational thoughts would have to be worked out irrationally and not absolutely? Because I think Eisenmann only gets parts of Lewitt right.
Yeah.
Or the parts that he wants to get right.
Yeah.
And their notes.
I mean, I would say we're interested in I think that the rational part of it, let's say, produced exactly that strategy for us produced the dead end that we're in now, where you if you take that, how many reviews have we sat in, let's say? I can remember my entire career, and also as a teacher, and this is one of the kind of most banal reviews that we've sat in, where everything was about what is your methodology, how are you consistent to the logic, what, you know, like how are you rational. I spent 10 years pretty much either as a student in that or as a teacher of that, and at a certain point you realize that is just produced a kind of atrophy of the discipline where people have forgotten to think culturally about the project of architecture. Is that a cliche?
No,
Yeah.
no, but I think to raise Eisenmann, to raise
I love Peter.
Eisenmann as the germ that led to the atrophy of thinking about architecture in cultural terms, I think that's
No, he's the best at it.
that's-
I don't think
he's-
Eisenmann. Listen, Eisenmann to me is a model, and he's a great model. But if you look at what Eisenmann,
No, he's a straw man.
Well,
He's
he
a
is,
straw man.
but he produces.
He's the guy that produces
Yeah.
geometry free of physics, and without that, there is no pleasure in your bouncy drawings. So thank God there was a Peter Eisenmann,
Yeah,
because
absolutely.
otherwise you don't get the category of play.
Yes.
So I guess now I'm being didactic in the sense that your rhetoric is not avoiding, but it's strategic in the sense that it's producing this historical narrative of lament so that you can produce the bouncy pleasure.
I'm not lamenting him. I think all I'm saying is that we've ended in a place, and I don't know if people agree with me or not, and I thought it would make people upset even to say this, but where expressionism and like say positivist scripting and form making have become the same thing almost. It's collapsed. So these were opposite categories at one point. Like the enemy of the avant-garde through rational project was expressionism. Yet now the same rational project has produced a new expressionism, let's say, which that's how I see it. I may be wrong. But and so what do you do at that moment? Because that's when automatically these categories that we have set up as a discipline become really questionable and problematic. And so we have to find some other way of working. And in a way, you're right in the sense of producing straw or propping up these things in a way to as a kind of necessary, or even even if it is producing a fake history of a certain sense of a discipline, a fiction, but it's necessary to do that in order to figure out how to move forward. So. Yeah.
I have a question about cavemen versus zombies.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a good one. I kind of got a sense of
Maybe you can talk about a different kind of scripting and a different kind of expressionism latent within those two different forms of performance, and your role in using them, leveraging them.
So zombies would be sort of the disciplinary, the John McMurrow zombies.
Yeah.
The disciplinary kind of how does he put it? It's just like they're kind of feeding off the brains of others, I think, or something like this. It's just kind of the lingering project of a kind of dead avant-garde, and then the primitives or the cavemen are kind of, in a way, more of the modernist myth in a certain sense of these sort of originary myths that are always part of, in a way, avant-garde, or at least the modernist avant-garde. How they coexist, they shouldn't coexist in a way, but they are here. I mean, and the movies, like for instance, I didn't talk at all about the movies, but the movies are for us to try out some of these ideas in a way that the kind of fictions and the narratives are. We also tend to produce in all of our projects movies about them, which are another level of a kind of narrative, which are in a way collapsing even further kind of fictions of fantasies that we imagine of the projects that have nothing to do with any of them. For instance, there's one here for a house we did in Denver, where it's a couple, Frank and Alice. They're architects. They have an office called the Boudoir, and they talk about they argue over architecture, of what it should be like. And so a lot of cases we're producing sort of, let's say, narratives about architecture itself, in a way, as stories that are also in a way kind of personal or something, or intimate, or so. And then other ones about, this kind of group, like the PS1 is a kind of, I can sort of scrub through some of them. We are near Hollywood, I guess. Is you can, there's these sort of fictional anthropology about the project, which is narrated in a French-Canadian accent, and or sort of internet UN accent, we called it, and.
The limited written documentation related to the encampment
they're all on this thing called the fungus.
Is an important part of its discourse.
These
With its
people?
natural cooling systems, the encampment.
Well, it's not. This is the effect of maybe the fungus, or you're on the fungus too. Is kind of a thing, maybe. So it's not clear if the person taking the footage is on the fungus or not.
Of these efforts,
so.
Irreconcilable with their spiritual motivation, contributes to the general malaise of its subjects.
It's filled with all sorts of footnotes and. Anyways, eventually it's kind of a story about these kind of this camp that's in what's called the no man's land, and eventually the younger group of this camp. Let's see.
Abandon their characteristic attentiveness and choose to sleep during the middle of the day with their eyewear on. In his third analytical text on the subject, Goderdijk writes that this compulsion to sleep at irregular intervals, and usually all at once, is a particular anomaly of this encampment. Goderdijk explains this anomaly as a psychological coping mechanism in response to the perception of a premature arrival of the future. According to the documentation, the subjects all profess a deep knowledge of what the future will look like. Unfortunately, it looks different for each subject. In their spontaneous
it's all done in a kind of, in search of kind of film quality too. Leonard Nimoy, sort of. We could only have gotten Leonard Nimoy.
As a substitute
but the
for room to occupy alone.
And in a way, there's a problem with the mechanical system, which causes a riot, and they all decide they at that moment. That's their moment to try to escape the camp. So. We do this with all. This is another one. Anyways, we should. In a way, for us also the effects of, like Sylvia's right. The music is really key to these whole things for us. So, and we make large models, film them, put computer stuff. They're kind of part of the culture of an office. One part of doing the office policy is because actually at one level, I think at a certain point when you run an office, we've realized this after a couple of years, is that what you do in an office is actually produce a little culture. And that's probably one of the most important things you can do in your office, is try to figure out a way to produce a little intense culture where we all are, looking at readings and talking about things. Anyways, and finding ways to discuss and talk about the work that is not, that allows us to sort of feed off of each other. So as opposed to really employees where, I mean, you can have that too in a really professional model, but you get far less out of it and the office gets less out of it. And I think the key to running a successful office, we hope, we're not successful, but we hope, is that you produce you can produce a culture, and that culture produces better buildings and more interesting architecture, let's say. Anyways. Thanks, sorry.